Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lord of Frights. Today, we will embark on a journey full of mystery and horror, where restless spirits and sorrowful secrets still quietly exist. Have you ever heard about the churches where ghosts still wander at night, or the stories of strange sounds and unexplainable presences? Today, I will share with you 7 chilling true stories, each one hiding secrets waiting to be uncovered. From sorrowful souls searching for lost love to restless spirits struggling with their past, you will feel the thrill as we step into these sacred spaces. Prepare yourselves, because these tales will send shivers down your spine and linger in your memory. Let's explore the mysteries of haunted churches around the world, where the line between life and death seems to blur. Story 1. The Haunting Nun at Borley Rectory. Tucked away on a desolate road in Essex, England, Borley Rectory stands as one of the most infamous haunted sites in the country. Its decrepit and foreboding exterior has long made it the center of chilling ghost stories and inexplicable supernatural occurrences. Those who dare to visit at night often feel an eerie silence, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that freezes the air, as though the entire place is holding its breath, waiting for something dreadful to unfold. Locals whisper about the apparition of a ghostly nun draped in an old, tattered white habit, wandering the church grounds, vanishing as night falls. Legend has it that centuries ago, when Borley Rectory was still a functioning monastery, a young nun fell deeply in love with a monk. Their love was tender but forbidden, a grievous sin in the eyes of the church. By day, they maintained the facade of strict piety, but by night, they met in secret, sharing fleeting moments of passion in the shadows of the monastery. Their trysts took place in the darkened corridors, illuminated only by the flicker of candlelight and the oppressive weight of the church's watchful silence. But secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually surface. One fateful night, as they moved stealthily through the halls, they were discovered. The fury of those in power within the monastery was swift and merciless. The nun was captured, accused of betraying her sacred vows and bringing shame to the church. No one listened to her pleas, and her punishment was as cruel as it was terrifying. She was sentenced to be buried alive. Since that horrific night, her spirit has never known peace. It is said that on moonless nights, when the cold wind howls through the desolate corridors, one can hear her mournful wails echoing across the grounds, cries of a soul trapped in eternal torment. One night, a curious young couple decided to venture to Borley Rectory, eager to uncover the truth behind the ghost stories. They had heard tales of the haunted nun, but remained skeptical. By the time they arrived, darkness had enveloped the church, the wind whistling through the ancient trees, whose gnarled branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. The faint beams of their flashlight barely pierced the thick fog as they walked, each step echoing in the unnerving quiet. Suddenly, the wife felt a sudden chill. It was as though a cold breath had passed right through her. She turned to her husband about to speak when both of them froze. They heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and unmistakable, coming from somewhere behind them. Yet they knew they were alone. The sound reverberated through the empty courtyard, each step growing louder as if something or someone was following. In a panic, they rushed into the church, seeking shelter. But inside, the atmosphere only grew more oppressive. The air was thick with dread, and every creak of the old wooden beams seemed to amplify the eerie silence. Then, from a distant corner, a figure began to materialize. It was a nun, her face pale as death, her eyes hollow and vacant. She stood motionless, staring at the couple with a gaze that pierced through their very souls. The wife screamed, but before she could flee, the apparition vanished into the shadows, leaving only an icy stillness in its wake. Not only the locals, but even paranormal investigators have been drawn to Borley Rectory, seeking to uncover the truth behind the sinister legends. Setting up camp within the church grounds, they brought cameras, recording devices, and electromagnetic detectors, hoping to capture evidence of the paranormal. One particularly cold night, the investigators were startled by the sound of knocking, slow, deliberate, and coming from the front door. Yet no one stood there. Moments later, a soft whisper, barely audible, seemed to drift through the air. "Help me. Don't leave me here." One investigator approached the window, only to be hit by a sudden frigid gust of wind that knocked him to the ground. And then, through the lens of their camera, they saw it, a faint, ghostly figure moving slowly across the screen. A nun, dressed in white, her eyes hollow and empty, her face etched with eternal sorrow. But the most terrifying discovery came later. When they reviewed the footage back at camp, they noticed something chilling. Two eyes, watching them from the darkness, eyes that did not belong to anyone in their group. Eyes of a spirit, trapped in never-ending agony. Borley Rectory continues to be a place of deep terror for all who dare enter. The ghost of the nun, eternally wandering in her tattered white habit, searches endlessly for the release she will never find. The night air is often filled with distant screams, ghostly footsteps, and the hollow gaze of a woman lost to time. Those who come too close to the church at night may feel the unsettling sensation of being watched, haunted by the tragic story of the nun who was condemned by love. She remains there, in the shadows, her restless spirit forever tied to the grounds of Borley Rectory, waiting in vain for the redemption that will never come. Her hollow eyes and silent cries will forever haunt anyone brave enough to venture near, making Borley Rectory one of the most haunted and feared places in all of England. Story 2. The Ghost of the Priest at St. Nicholas Church, Croatia. Nestled within an ancient village in Croatia, St. Nicholas Church has long been known not just for its architectural beauty, but for the dark, terrifying stories surrounding it. Built in the 12th century, its thick walls and towering arches stand as a reminder of the passing of time. However, time has done nothing to erase the haunting shadows of its tragic past, especially the tale of a priest's untimely and unjust death. Centuries after his murder, his tormented spirit still lingers, unable to rest, making the church one of Croatia's most infamous haunted locations. By day, St. Nicholas Church appears calm and sacred, but those who enter feel an unexplainable weight pressing down on them. The holy statues stand motionless, yet there's a creeping sensation as if they are watching every step taken by visitors. Sometimes, people feel they are being observed, but upon turning around, they find nothing but an empty church. The old, termite-eaten wooden pews creak when someone sits down, yet there are moments when this sound echoes through the church with no one in sight. Candles flicker, but their glow seems insufficient to chase away the shadows lurking in the church's dark corners. However, the true horror unfolds when night falls. As the moonlight filters through the tall windows, stories of the priest's restless spirit come to life, bringing with them nightmares few would dare confront. The story of the priest's death has been passed down through generations, yet the exact details remain shrouded in the fog of history. According to legend, in the 15th century, the village where the church stood was ruled by a greedy and cruel noble class. The priest, known for his compassion and bravery, stood up for the villagers, denouncing the injustices perpetrated by the elite. He urged his people not only to pray for justice, but also to act against the oppression. His courage, however, made him enemies. The local rulers plotted against him, and one fateful night, when the church was cloaked in silence, a group of shadowy figures slipped inside. They ambushed him while he was deep in prayer, stabbing him to death on the very pulpit from which he preached. His blood soaked into the stone floor, and his dying cries of injustice still seemed to echo through the church, forever tainting the place with his agony. Since that night, it is said that the priest's soul has never found peace. His ghost frequently appears during the late hours of the night, right where he was murdered. Villagers claim to have seen his ghostly figure standing at the pulpit, head bowed in prayer, only to slowly fade into the air when approached, leaving behind an icy chill. One night, a devout woman stayed behind after Mass to offer additional prayers. As she knelt, eyes closed, she heard a faint whisper coming from the pulpit. At first she thought it was the wind, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. It was a voice, not of the living. She opened her eyes and looked toward the pulpit, and her heart nearly stopped. There stood the priest, pale-faced, his eyes filled with sorrow and rage. There are also accounts of people entering the church on windy nights, feeling an unbearable coldness as soon as they step inside. Some claim they can sense the priest's presence standing close by, his ghostly eyes fixed on them. The weight of that gaze makes people want to run, but their legs feel paralyzed, as if the ground itself is holding them in place. The priest's prayers have become an integral part of the terrifying legend of St. Nicholas Church. On quiet nights, eerie chanting can be heard echoing from the altar. Some describe it as prayers rising from the depths of the earth, from the walls, or even from the sky above the church. The disturbing part is that the voice doesn't come from the living. It is from another world, where the priest's soul remains trapped. One time, a group of curious tourists decided to test their bravery by spending the night inside the church. Armed with modern equipment designed to capture supernatural phenomena, they prepared for the night. At first, nothing happened, but when the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere in the church shifted. Everything became unnervingly silent, and just as they began to feel uneasy, a cold, hollow voice came from the pulpit. "Pray for me." The group turned to the pulpit, and there, in the faint moonlight, stood a shadowy figure. The priest, holding a worn Bible, his mouth moving in prayer, while blood began to pour from his chest, dripping onto the floor below. One of the tourists screamed, and as soon as the sound echoed through the church, the ghost vanished. Yet, the haunting prayers continued, sending shivers down their spines. Though centuries have passed, the story of the priest still haunts both the villagers and visitors. It is said that until his wrongful death is avenged, his spirit will never find rest. His eerie prayers will continue to echo throughout the church, and anyone daring enough to enter after dark may encounter his vengeful spirit. St. Nicholas Church is now not only a historical monument, but also a destination for thrill seekers. Yet, what many don't realize is that curiosity comes at a price. Those who have seen the priest's ghost never forget the look in his eyes, filled with resentment and anguish. His cold prayers linger in their minds, haunting their dreams. Those brave enough to enter St. Nicholas Church after nightfall should be prepared, for the priest's restless soul may be waiting for you. Story 3. The Knocks from the Crypt at St. Andrew's Church, Scotland. Nestled in the heart of the Scottish Highlands, St. Andrew's Church stands as a beacon of history and haunting tales. Its stone walls, weathered by time and adorned with ancient carvings, tell stories of a bygone era filled with devotion and despair. The church has long been revered not just for its architectural beauty, but also for the chilling tales that lurk beneath its hallowed grounds. The crypts, where the medieval priests are buried, hold secrets that echo through the centuries, manifesting as strange sounds and ghostly apparitions that continue to terrify and fascinate those who dare to visit. As twilight descends, the vibrant atmosphere of St. Andrew's transforms. A heavy fog often blankets the area, swallowing the light of the setting sun and casting long shadows across the cemetery surrounding the church. The once inviting entrance now looms ominously, as if guarding the stories hidden within. Visitors report feeling an unnatural chill as they step through the threshold, an unsettling prelude to the mysteries waiting below. During the day, the church buzzes with the voices of congregants and tourists, yet as night falls, an eerie silence envelops the building. The air grows thick with a palpable tension, and the faint sound of rustling leaves outside becomes a mere whisper against the backdrop of stillness within. Those who venture near the crypt often hear unsettling noises, an echoing series of knocks, as if someone or something is trying to escape from the depths of the earth. The origins of the knocking sounds date back centuries, with villagers sharing tales of priests whose spirits remain tethered to the church, unable to find peace. Among these spirits, the story of Father Malcolm stands out, a tragic figure whose life ended under mysterious circumstances, leaving behind a legacy steeped in sorrow. Father Malcolm was known for his unwavering dedication to his parishioners, often spending long hours in prayer and counsel. However, his compassion earned him powerful enemies, and when scandal erupted around him, the community was torn apart. Accusations of heresy and betrayal swirled like a tempest, and ultimately his life was cut short one fateful night. The church was enveloped in darkness when Father Malcolm met his end, betrayed by those he trusted. As he knelt in prayer before the altar, the door creaked open and shadows slipped in. Struck down in his moment of devotion, his cries for mercy echoed through the church but were drowned out by the sinister laughter of his assailants. With his blood staining the stone floor, the priest's soul was trapped, forever tied to the very place where he had devoted his life to God. Years passed, yet the sound of his desperate pleas lingered within the walls of St. Andrew's. Visitors recount hearing the rhythmic knocking that pulses like a heartbeat from the crypt, a haunting reminder of the priest's unfinished business. On moonlit nights, the atmosphere grows thick with an energy that is both electric and suffocating, as if the air itself is charged with Father Malcolm's unresolved anguish. One evening, a group of adventurous university students, intrigued by the stories of St. Andrew's, decided to explore the church after dark. They arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the church illuminated only by the light of their flashlights. With excitement and a hint of trepidation, they descended into the crypt, hoping to uncover the mysteries that had entranced so many before them. As they stepped into the damp, musty air of the crypt, they felt an immediate shift in atmosphere. The flickering light cast unsettling shadows on the stone walls, and a chill ran down their spines. With each step deeper into the bowels of the church, they felt as though they were trespassing into a sacred and forbidden space. Suddenly, a sharp knock echoed through the crypt, causing them to freeze in place. It was a sound unlike anything they had experienced, a hollow thud that resonated from the very walls surrounding them. The students exchanged nervous glances, but curiosity urged them to press on. They decided to conduct an informal séance, hoping to connect with the spirits that lingered. "Is anyone there?" one of the students called out, her voice trembling slightly in the oppressive silence. In response, a series of deliberate knocks filled the air, each one more urgent than the last. The group felt an unexplainable pull, drawing them closer to the source of the sound. As they moved deeper into the crypt, the knocking morphed into a distinct rhythm, almost as if it were a heartbeat. The tension in the air became palpable, as a cold draft swept through the crypt, snuffing out their flashlights. Darkness enveloped them, their hearts pounding in unison with the ghostly knocks. It was in this eerie stillness that a figure began to take form before them, a shadowy silhouette of a man in tattered priestly robes. The apparition was unmistakably Father Malcolm. His face, though pale and gaunt, was a visage of deep sorrow and regret. As he raised his hand, pointing towards the students, they felt a wave of desperation wash over them. "Father Malcolm?" one of them ventured cautiously, stepping forward. The figure nodded, a slow, sorrowful motion that echoed the weight of centuries. The air grew heavy with unspoken words as the ghostly priest appeared to struggle to communicate, his mouth moving but no sound emerging. The students were transfixed, caught between fear and an overwhelming sense of compassion for the tortured spirit. In that moment, time seemed to stretch, and the students experienced a vivid flash of memories, not their own, but those of Father Malcolm. They witnessed scenes of betrayal, despair, and the heart-wrenching moment of his demise. The vision engulfed them, pulling them into the past where they could feel the priest's anguish as if it were their own. The flickering candles illuminated the crypt again, revealing the stone altar stained with the remnants of his tragic end. The oppressive silence broke as the sound of muffled prayers filled the air, hauntingly echoing through the chamber. It was as if Father Malcolm's soul was crying out for forgiveness and recognition. Feeling the weight of the priest's sorrow, one student spoke softly, "We hear you, Father. We know you're here." At those words, the knocking intensified, reverberating like thunder, shaking the very foundations of the crypt. Suddenly, the vision faded, and the students found themselves back in the present, breathless and wide-eyed. The figure of Father Malcolm lingered for a moment longer, his expression softening, before dissolving into the shadows. Panicking, the students turned and fled the crypt, their hearts racing, but the pounding of knocks followed them up the stairs, a relentless reminder of the spirit they had disturbed. As they burst into the fresh night air, the crypt fell silent, the haunting atmosphere dissipating into the cool breeze. Shaken but exhilarated, they gathered outside the church, sharing their experiences in hushed voices. The recordings they had captured revealed not only the echoes of their terrified breaths, but also the unmistakable sound of knocking, layered with faint whispers that filled the air with sorrow. Each whisper seemed to beckon them, urging them to remember the story of Father Malcolm and the injustice he endured. The legend of St. Andrew's Church and its crypt continues to captivate locals and visitors alike. Many believe that until Father Malcolm's story is fully recognized and justice is served, his spirit will remain trapped, forever echoing his pleas for redemption through the stones of the church. Today, the church stands as a monument not just to faith, but to the enduring spirits of those who once walked its halls. Visitors, drawn by the stories of the crypt, come to pay their respects, yet many hesitate to enter after dark. They fear the whispers of the past and the relentless knocks that resonate from the depths below. As darkness envelops St. Andrew's Church, the chilling sounds echo once more, a reminder that some stories are never truly finished. The spirits of the past are alive, waiting for someone brave enough to listen to their tales and offer the forgiveness they desperately seek. In the stillness of the night, the knocks from the crypt call out, beckoning the living to remember, to feel, and to understand the tragedies that linger just beneath the surface of time. Story 4. The Living Skeleton of the Capuchin Crypt, Italy. In the heart of Rome, where ancient history collides with the macabre, lies the Capuchin Crypt, a chilling sight known for its eerie collection of skeletal remains. This subterranean chapel, part of the Santa Maria della Concezione dei Cappuccini Church, serves as a final resting place for thousands of Capuchin friars. Their bones are arranged in haunting displays, serving both as a testament to the passage of time and a grim reminder of mortality. As visitors wander through the dimly lit chambers, they encounter artful arrangements of skulls and femurs, a silent, unsettling symphony that evokes both awe and horror. On a particularly cold evening, a group of adventurous tourists gathered, eager to explore the crypt's infamous halls. They entered with a sense of curiosity and excitement, unaware of the sinister secrets that lay in wait. The air was thick with an otherworldly atmosphere, laden with the faint scent of incense that seemed to linger like a specter among the bones. With each step deeper into the crypt, they could feel an unsettling presence creeping upon them, as if the very walls were alive with stories of the long-departed friars. The tourists marveled at the intricate displays, their voices hushed in reverence. However, as they ventured further, a sudden chill swept through the chamber, extinguishing the flickering candlelight. Shadows danced ominously along the walls, creating an eerie ballet of the past. The group exchanged nervous glances, their excitement beginning to morph into a creeping fear. It was then that they heard it, a low whisper, soft yet distinct, echoing through the crypt. At first, they thought it was merely the wind, but as the whispers grew louder, they could discern a haunting chant, a mournful hymn that resonated with an ethereal quality. Their hearts raced as they strained to listen, but the words remained indecipherable, lost to the ages. Just as they began to question the origin of the sound, one of the tourists, a curious young woman named Clara, caught sight of a figure moving among the bones. She squinted into the dimness and gasped, her breath hitching in her throat. One of the skeletons, draped in the tattered remnants of a friar's robe, appeared to twitch as if stirred by an unseen force. "Did you see that?" Clara exclaimed, her voice trembling. The others turned, their faces pale as they followed her gaze. The skeleton's hand moved again, fingers curling as though beckoning them closer. Panic surged through the group, but Clara, captivated by an inexplicable pull, took a hesitant step forward. As she approached, the whispers intensified, enveloping her in a chilling embrace. Suddenly, the skeleton's skull turned towards her, its empty eye sockets seemingly piercing into her very soul. In that moment, Clara felt a rush of emotions, grief, despair, and an overwhelming desire to communicate. It was as if the spirit of the friar had been awakened, reaching out from the abyss to share a story long forgotten. The air thickened, and the crypt transformed into a realm beyond reality. Clara closed her eyes, allowing the overwhelming energy to envelop her. Visions flooded her mind, images of a once vibrant friar, consumed by his faith and the tragic fate that awaited him. He had lived in an era of great strife, torn between his devotion to God and the harrowing choices forced upon him by a turbulent world. The friar's life was a tapestry of sorrow, woven with threads of sacrifice and regret. He had once been a man of great compassion, tirelessly helping the needy and the suffering. But as darkness loomed over the land, he found himself caught in a web of deceit and betrayal. In a moment of desperation, he had been falsely accused of a crime he did not commit, leading to his brutal execution. As the visions faded, Clara opened her eyes, trembling. The whispers had transformed into a sorrowful lament, resonating with the loss and despair that had marked the friar's existence. The skeleton remained still, its once twitching limbs now frozen in time, yet Clara felt an unbreakable connection between them. It was as if she had become the vessel for his story, entrusted with a truth that demanded to be acknowledged. "Why are you still here?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible against the backdrop of the crypt's echo. The response came in the form of a gust of wind swirling around her, rustling the tattered robes of the skeleton. The air grew colder, and for a fleeting moment she glimpsed the figure of the friar standing beside her, his face twisted in sorrow. Suddenly, the weight of the moment became too much to bear. Clara stumbled back, her heart racing as the whispers turned into a cacophony of wails echoing through the chambers. The other tourists, sensing the shift in energy, turned to flee, but Clara felt rooted to the spot, torn between the living world and the spectral plea of the friar. As she took a step back, the skeleton slumped back into its original position, the connection severed. The whispers faded into silence, leaving behind an oppressive stillness. The other tourists rushed past Clara, their terrified screams echoing in her ears as they fled the crypt. Once outside, the group collapsed onto the cobblestone street, gasping for breath. Clara, however, remained frozen in thought, grappling with the profound experience she had just endured. She had witnessed the resurrection of a forgotten soul, the haunting tale of a life cut short, and the lingering echoes of grief that transcended time. Days turned into weeks, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling of the friar's presence. She returned to the Capuchin crypt, determined to honor the spirit that had reached out to her. Armed with candles and flowers, she sought to pay tribute to the nameless friar, hoping to give him the recognition he so desperately craved. As she lit the candles in the dimness of the crypt, the air around her shifted once more. A soft warmth enveloped her, and for a brief moment she felt at peace. The whispers returned, but this time they were not cries of despair. They were words of gratitude, swirling around her in a gentle embrace. Clara left the crypt that day, transformed, carrying with her the weight of a story that demanded to be told. The Capuchin crypt, with its chilling displays of skeletal remains, became not only a place of death, but also a sanctuary for the voices that lingered in the shadows. Visitors continued to flock to the crypt, but few could fathom the depth of the stories that echoed within. The living memories of the friars that once walked the earth, now forever entwined with the whispers of the past. The Capuchin crypt stands as a haunting reminder of mortality, a place where the lines between life and death blur. As the shadows deepen and the whispers grow louder, the stories of the forgotten friars continue to resonate, calling out to those brave enough to listen. Clara's encounter with the living skeleton became a part of the crypt's legacy, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who seek recognition even beyond the grave. The crypt remains a pilgrimage site for the curious, the seekers of truth, and those willing to confront the darker aspects of existence, forever entwined with the echoes of the past. Story 5. La Recoleta Church, Bolivia. The Ghosts of Children. In the heart of Sucre, Bolivia, the La Recoleta Church stands as a solemn monument to history, its stone facade bearing witness to centuries of worship and mourning. Yet beyond its architectural beauty lies a darker secret, a chilling tale whispered among locals and visitors alike about the spirits of children buried in its cemetery. When night falls, this ancient structure transforms, harboring a multitude of ghostly apparitions that provoke both fear and curiosity. It was a crisp autumn evening when a group of adventurous students, eager to experience the supernatural, decided to explore the La Recoleta Church after hearing spine-tingling stories of children's laughter echoing through its hallowed halls. As twilight descended, a veil of fog rolled in, cloaking the church in an eerie mist. Despite the discomfort gnawing at them, the students, fueled by adrenaline and bravado, approached the heavy wooden doors, pushing them open with a creak that seemed to awaken the very spirits within. Once inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air grew thick with an unshakable chill, and the flickering candlelight cast haunting shadows on the walls, twisting the ornate carvings into grotesque figures. As they ventured deeper into the nave, the students could swear they heard soft whispers and giggles, like a distant echo of carefree childhood. Suddenly, a high-pitched laugh pierced the silence, reverberating against the stone walls. "Did you hear that?" exclaimed Marta, her heart racing. The group exchanged nervous glances, each feeling the hair on the back of their necks stand on end. As they moved further into the church, the laughter grew louder, more playful, as if beckoning them to join in a game from which they could not escape. "Let's go check it out," Xavier suggested, attempting to mask his fear with bravado. The group followed him, drawn towards the sound like moths to a flame. They arrived at a dimly lit corridor lined with ancient frescoes depicting the lives of saints and angels. The laughter now seemed to echo from a room at the end of the corridor, a small chamber with a heavy, weathered door slightly ajar. Pushing the door open, they were met with an overwhelming sense of dread. The room was filled with dust-covered pews and crumbling statues, but it was the chill in the air that sent shivers down their spines. As they stepped inside, the laughter abruptly ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed heavily against them. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Marta's eye. She turned to see a small figure dart past her, cloaked in white. "There!" she shouted, pointing as the apparition vanished around the corner. Without thinking, she raced after it, her friends reluctantly following. As they rounded the corner, they stumbled upon a sight that would haunt them forever. A circle of small, ghostly figures, dressed in tattered white garments, their faces lit up with innocent smiles, yet their eyes bore an unsettling emptiness. The children, ethereal and glowing, began to dance in a circle, their laughter echoing in the air like the tinkling of distant bells. "Join us! Join us!" they sang in unison, their voices sweet yet haunting. The atmosphere became intoxicating, pulling the students closer, as if the very essence of childhood joy wrapped around them like a shroud. But deep within their minds, a warning bell rang. These children were not merely spirits, they were the lost souls of those who had died too young, their fates intertwined with the church. Marta hesitated, her instincts screaming for her to run. She turned to Javier, whose face was pale as he whispered, "This isn't right, we need to leave." But the spell of the children's laughter had already begun to weave its dark magic around them, holding them in a trance. As the students stepped closer, the joyous expressions of the ghostly children morphed into sinister grins. The room began to spin, and the air thickened with despair. The children stopped dancing, their eyes turning from joy to sorrow as they pointed at Marta. "You must stay," they whispered, their voices now echoing with a sense of urgency and desperation. "Why? What do you want from us?" Marta stammered, realizing that these were not merely playful spirits. The children's laughter had masked a deeper sorrow, a longing for companionship in a world that had forgotten them. The smallest child stepped forward, her transparent hand reaching out. "We're so lonely," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We just want to play." The other children echoed her words, their expressions shifting from playful innocence to palpable anguish. At that moment, Marta understood the gravity of their situation. "We can help you," she said, her voice shaking but filled with determination. "We can remember you. We won't let you be forgotten." As if hearing her, the children's expressions softened and they began to retreat, their glow dimming slightly. "Promise?" the smallest one asked, her eyes wide and searching. Marta nodded, her heart aching for these lost souls. "I promise." In that instant, the atmosphere shifted again, and the darkness receded slightly. The children began to fade, but their laughter lingered, no longer haunting, but rather a gentle reminder of their existence. "Thank you," they chorused, their voices like a gentle breeze. With one final smile, the children vanished, leaving the room in a heavy silence. The students stood frozen, realizing they had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As they stumbled back through the church, the air felt lighter, yet the weight of what had transpired lingered heavily on their minds. They emerged into the cool night air, their hearts still racing from the encounter. Though they left La Recoleta Church, they knew they had not truly escaped. The memory of those children, their laughter, and their plea for remembrance would haunt them forever. Each night, as they lay in bed, they could still hear the faint echoes of laughter drifting through the air, a reminder that some spirits remain bound to the places they once loved, longing for the world to remember them. From that night on, Marta made it her mission to share the story of the children of La Recoleta, ensuring that their laughter would not fade into the silence of oblivion. With each telling, the spirits of the lost children found a little more peace, and La Recoleta Church became a place not only of mourning, but also of remembrance, an eternal testament to the innocence lost too soon. Story 6, Greyfriars Kirk, Scotland, the haunted tomb of George Mackenzie. In the heart of Edinburgh lies a place whose name sends shivers down the spine of anyone familiar with its dark history, Greyfriars Kirk. While by day the churchyard appears serene, with its ancient gravestones standing as quiet monuments to centuries past, by night this place transforms into one of Scotland's most feared haunted locations. At the center of the churchyard's chilling tales is the story of George Mackenzie, a man whose name has become synonymous with cruelty, death, and an unquiet afterlife. Known in history as Bluety Mackenzie, he was a ruthless lawyer responsible for the deaths of thousands of Scottish Covenanters, Presbyterians who resisted the government's efforts to impose religious conformity. During the late 17th century, Mackenzie ordered the torture, imprisonment, and execution of countless innocents, sending their souls to their deaths while showing no mercy. Yet while Mackenzie lived his life in power and terror, death offered no peace for him. When he passed away in 1691, he was entombed in a grand mausoleum in the Greyfriars Kirkyard, resting not far from the very prisoners he once tormented. But rest is something his soul never found. For centuries, Mackenzie's tomb remained undisturbed, a grim reminder of his blood-stained legacy. However, in 1999, a homeless man seeking refuge from the cold stumbled upon Mackenzie's crypt. Desperate, he broke into the tomb, accidentally damaging the coffin. What followed became the stuff of nightmares. From that fateful night, the Mackenzie poltergeist was born. Almost immediately, strange occurrences began to unfold around Greyfriars Kirk. Visitors reported feeling an unnatural cold surrounding the tomb, even on warm days. Tourists complained of being overcome by sudden dizziness and nausea. Yet, the physical sensations were only the beginning. Soon, more terrifying reports emerged. Accounts of scratches, bruises, and even violent attacks inflicted by an unseen force. Greyfriars Kirk quickly earned its reputation as a place of dread, where fear seeps into your very bones. Locals began avoiding the graveyard, especially after dark. Those who dared to venture too close to Mackenzie's mausoleum often left with inexplicable injuries. One of the first documented attacks involved a woman on a ghost tour. She had barely entered the mausoleum when she screamed in agony, collapsing as though she had been struck by an invisible hand. Later, bruises in the shape of fingers appeared on her neck, as if someone or something had tried to choke the life out of her. Tour guides, used to entertaining guests with spooky stories, found themselves unable to deny the growing fear. One guide swore he felt a force yank him backward as he stood near Mackenzie's tomb, a sensation so powerful he believed it was attempting to drag him into the crypt itself. His account was followed by dozens of others who reported similar experiences, feeling unseen hands tugging at their clothing, pulling at their hair, and shoving them away from the cursed ground. As the years passed, the haunting only seemed to intensify. One night, a security guard patrolling the area after dark reported hearing what sounded like heavy footsteps trailing behind him. Each time he turned, no one was there. The footsteps followed him for over an hour, stopping only when he passed by Mackenzie's tomb, where a loud bang echoed from inside the crypt. Terrified, the guard fled, refusing to return. Perhaps the most chilling reports, however, came from those brave enough to explore the tomb after midnight. A group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night near Mackenzie's grave. Armed with cameras and recording equipment, they expected to catch glimpses of the supernatural. What they didn't expect was the sheer terror that awaited them. As midnight approached, the air around them grew icy, their breaths visible in the cold. Suddenly, one of the investigators felt a sharp pain on her back. When she lifted her shirt, long red scratches marred her skin, as though claws had raked across her. But the horror didn't stop there. As they scrambled to gather their equipment, the investigators heard a faint whisper. "Leave." It was followed by another, more sinister voice, a low growl that seemed to come from the ground itself. "This is my place." Panicked, they fled the cemetery, leaving behind equipment that would later reveal eerie recordings, moans, whispers, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing back and forth near the tomb. But there was something even more disturbing. In one of the photographs, they captured a shadowy figure standing just behind Mackenzie's tomb. The figure was tall, dressed in what looked like old, tattered robes, and though it had no visible face, its presence exuded malice. Greyfriars Kirk became a place that no one dared approach alone, especially at night. Even the bravest of ghost hunters often left shaken, with many refusing to return. The locals now refer to the malevolent entity as the Mackenzie poltergeist, a spirit so vengeful and violent that it continues to lash out at the living. Some speculate that Mackenzie's spirit remains restless due to the many atrocities he committed in life. Others believe the disturbance of his tomb in 1999 awakened something far darker than just a human spirit, something demonic. While many still flock to Greyfriars Kirk, drawn by the macabre allure of facing the supernatural, they do so at great risk. The poltergeist's power has only grown stronger, and for those who wander too close to the tomb, the consequences can be terrifying. Witnesses speak of oppressive cold, piercing glares from unseen eyes, and the unmistakable sense that something watches, waiting for the right moment to strike. People leave with bruises, scratches, and stories they will never forget, but some leave with more than just physical marks. They leave with a fear that follows them, a sense that the Mackenzie poltergeist has attached itself to them, even far from the churchyard. As the sun sets behind the ancient walls of Greyfriars Kirk, the shadows stretch long across the gravestones, and a deathly silence blankets the area. For those who come seeking the thrill of a ghostly encounter, beware. The spirit of Bluety Mackenzie is not one to be trifled with. His malevolent energy lingers, a constant reminder of his cruelty in life and his restless torment in death. Step too close to the crypt, and you may find yourself face to face with the spirit of Scotland's most feared persecutor. But remember, not everyone who enters the graveyard leaves the same. For some, the haunting never ends, as Mackenzie watches from the shadows, waiting to strike again. Story 7, The Chapel of the Cross, USA, The Ghost Bride. Hidden deep in the southern wilderness of Madison, Mississippi, stands the quiet and haunting Chapel of the Cross, a Gothic-style church that seems to exist outside the passage of time. Its towering stone spires reach towards the heavens, casting long shadows over the graves that surround it. During the day, the chapel is peaceful, almost serene, with its ivy-covered walls blending into the landscape. But as night falls, the air grows thick with an unsettling presence. Locals and visitors alike have long whispered of the Ghost Bride, a tragic spirit who roams the grounds in her tattered wedding dress, searching in vain for the love she lost over a century ago. The story begins in the mid-19th century, when the world was still wild, and Mississippi was a land of sprawling plantations and ancient oaks dripping with Spanish moss. Helen Johnston, a young woman of remarkable beauty and grace, was the daughter of a wealthy plantation owner. Her life seemed charmed, and she had everything a girl could wish for: wealth, status, and above all, love. She was deeply in love with Henry Vick, a dashing young man from a prominent family. They had been courting for several years, and when Henry finally proposed, it was the happiest day of Helen's life. Their wedding was set to take place at the Chapel of the Cross, a small but elegant church that Helen's father had helped build. The entire town was abuzz with excitement as preparations for the grand event began. Helen chose the most exquisite wedding dress, a flowing gown of white satin and lace, with a long veil that shimmered in the sunlight. She could hardly wait for the day when she would walk down the aisle, her heart filled with love and hope, to marry the man of her dreams. But fate is cruel, and Helen's dreams were shattered in the most tragic way imaginable. Just days before the wedding, disaster struck. Henry, known for his fiery temper and sense of honor, became involved in a deadly feud with another young man over a personal dispute. In those days, such matters were settled by duels, facing off with pistols at dawn. Despite Helen's pleas for Henry to walk away from the confrontation, his pride would not allow it. On the morning of the duel, Henry faced his opponent, pistols raised, and the two men stood back to back, counting their paces. The shot rang out, echoing through the still morning air. When the smoke cleared, Henry lay on the ground, bleeding from a fatal wound. He died before help could arrive, leaving behind the woman he loved and the life they were meant to share. The news of Henry's death reached Helen as she was in the midst of preparing for her wedding. The flowers had already been arranged, the guests invited, and the church adorned for the ceremony. But instead of walking down the aisle to marry her beloved, Helen found herself kneeling by his lifeless body, her heart breaking into pieces. Her beautiful white gown, which she had dreamed of wearing for her wedding, would now be a symbol of mourning rather than joy. Devastated beyond words, Helen never recovered from the loss of her fiancé. She spent the rest of her days in deep mourning, often visiting Henry's grave, which lay in the churchyard of the Chapel of the Cross. Locals say she would sit for hours at his graveside, dressed in black, her once bright eyes hollow with grief. She became a shadow of her former self, and as the years passed, she withdrew further and further from society. When Helen died years later, her body was buried near Henry's, as she had wished. Many believed that in death she would finally find peace and be reunited with her lost love. But it wasn't long after her burial that strange and eerie occurrences began to plague the chapel grounds. The first sighting of the ghost bride came just a few months after Helen's death. A caretaker, locking up the church one evening, glanced toward the graveyard and saw a woman in a flowing white gown, her back to him, standing beside Henry Vick's grave. At first, he assumed it was a mourner paying her respects, but as he approached, he realized something was terribly wrong. The woman's form seemed faint, almost translucent, and when she turned toward him, he saw that her eyes were filled with unbearable sadness. Before he could utter a word, the figure vanished into the mist. This was only the beginning. Over the years, countless visitors to the Chapel of the Cross have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a bride wandering the grounds, her white gown fluttering in the breeze, as if she were still waiting to be wed. Some say they have heard soft weeping coming from the graveyard at night, the sound of a woman crying out in despair. Others have felt an icy chill wash over them as they walked by Henry Vick's grave, as though an invisible presence were watching them, grieving for what was lost. One of the most chilling stories comes from a group of paranormal investigators who visited the chapel in the late 20th century. Armed with cameras, recording devices, and infrared lights, they set up their equipment near Helen and Henry's graves, hoping to capture evidence of the ghost bride. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped sharply and a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the graveyard in an eerie silence. Suddenly, one of the investigators felt a cold hand brush against his arm, though no one was near him. The others heard the faint sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel, yet saw nothing. Then, out of the mist, a figure began to materialize, a woman in a torn and tattered wedding gown, her eyes hollow and lifeless, her face twisted in sorrow. She drifted slowly toward them, her arms outstretched as if reaching for something or someone that was no longer there. The investigators fled, abandoning their equipment in terror. When they returned the next morning, they found their cameras knocked over and their recording devices dead. But one photograph remained, a blurry image of a woman in white standing beside Henry's grave, her face obscured by her veil. To this day, the legend of the ghost bride of the Chapel of the Cross endures. Many believe that Helen's spirit is trapped in the churchyard, bound to the place where her dreams of happiness were cruelly taken from her. She is a bride forever in mourning, searching for her lost love, waiting for a wedding that will never happen. Visitors to the chapel still report seeing her ghostly figure at dusk, wandering the graveyard, her eyes filled with eternal sorrow. Some say that if you listen closely, you can hear her soft, mournful weeping, carried on the wind like a lament for a love that will never die. Perhaps, in some otherworldly way, Helen is still waiting, hoping that one day she and Henry will be reunited. But until that day comes, she remains the ghost bride, forever wandering the grounds of the Chapel of the Cross, a tragic reminder of love lost to the cruel hand of fate.